They buried my drain under a mountain of snow, and when I locked it up, 85 homes up the hill started to panic. That is not an exaggeration. That is exactly how it went down. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 58 and I live at the very bottom of Ridgerest Hollow, a tidy little development tucked into the hills of western Massachusetts. If you stand on my back deck and look up, you see rows of big houses stepping up the slope, vinyl siding, big windows, grills that gleam like they own the place. Stand up there and look down, and you see my place older with oak trees leaning over the roof, a gravel driveway, the kind of house that was here before anyone thought to print a brochure. What most people don't notice unless you know exactly where to look is a 24-inch storm culvert that cuts across the edge of my lower yard. Concrete pipe steel grate hidden by brush in summer. It isn't pretty. It isn't supposed to be. That pipe is the reason those 85 homes can sit up there every spring and not watch their basements float away when the snow melts. All their runoff funnels down toward me. Every driveway, every street, every little lawn slopes my way. Decades ago, when the original farmer sold the upper acreage to a developer, the town required a drainage easement across what is now my property. It was recorded in 1981, plain language, stubborn clause. They could route storm water through that culvert as long as they maintained clear access and kept it unobstructed. As long as they maintained clear access. That sentence matters. It's the hinge on the whole thing. I bought this house 12 years after my wife passed. It was quiet down here, the oaks older than any of us leaves stacking along the fence in fall, the kind of place where you rake and half remember your father raking too. I liked being below the fancy houses. Their streetlights didn't reach me. Their HOA meetings were not my business. I planted tomatoes, fixed the porch, learned the rhythm. The first few winters were fine. Snow would fall, plows would clean the streets, and neat white ridges would appear up top. Some snow would slide down, sure, but the drains stayed clear. Last winter was different. After a spell of heavy wet storms, the HOA hired a new contractor. Big trucks, wide blades, working fast. Too fast. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was out back splitting firewood. I heard metal scrape, then a truck idling longer than it should. I looked up and saw a white wave crest the ridge. Then, slow as an avalanche, a load of plowed snow slid down the embankment and spilled into my yard. Not a little spill, a deliberate dump. I stood there in my gloves watching it settle over the grate and thought, well, that is new. I walked up the slope as far as I dared and caught one of the drivers before he pulled away. You can't dump that here, I said. He leaned out his window, shrugged. We were told this is the designated runoff area. Designated by who, I asked. He said the HOA. That was my introduction to how this was going to go. Every time it snowed after that, they plowed the streets clean and shoved the excess toward the edge where gravity did the rest. By mid-February, a 12-foot mound was sitting on top of my drain grate like a small glacier that had decided to take up residence. I took pictures not because I was angry, yet just because something about it felt careless. Then the thaw came. In New England, thaws don't have manners. They creep in by day, freeze at night, return harder. The first warm spell turned that snow mountain into a leaking sponge. Water pooled around the grate but couldn't enter. The compacted weight had sealed it tight. The next morning I stepped into my basement and felt cold squish under my boots. At first a thin film, then by evening an inch deep. I shut off the furnace when I saw water nibbling at its base. That furnace was only 3 years old. I stood in the dim basement light listening to the hum stop and felt something besides annoyance exposed. I called the HOA president, Victor Langley. Victor had moved in from Connecticut, retired marketing exec, the kind of man who treated the neighborhood like it needed a logo. He answered smooth, Daniel, what can I do for you? Stop burying my drain, I said. My basement just flooded. There was a pause, the kind where someone decides whether your problem is worth their attention. Snow removal is handled by our contractor, he said finally. If there's an issue, submit it in writing. I told him the contractor was dumping snow directly on the drainage easement. The agreement says you must maintain access. We maintain the infrastructure, came the clipped reply. The culvert is functional. It's not functional under 12 feet of snow, I said. He sighed, almost amused, promised to have Public Works look into it. Public Works came as a woman named Karen Doyle, younger than Victor Sharp, efficient, the kind who speaks in bullet points. She stomped up my yard, looked at the mound and the barely visible grate and said, "This is the most efficient location for snow storage downhill. It's also the only exit point for 85 homes, I said. She folded her arms. The drain itself is structurally sound. My furnace is not. That was flood number 1. By March, it had happened twice more. Each thaw sent water backing into my basement, soaking boxes I hadn't opened in years, 2 boxes of family photos among them. My wife laughing at the beach, my parents in front of their first house, ink running, faces blurring. There's a smell when cardboard sits in cold water too long, sour final. That's when annoyance turned into something else, not yet rage, resolve. The first flood felt like being blindsided. The second felt like being dismissed. The third, standing there with a shop vac humming the air thick with wet cardboard, I felt a weight settle in my chest. They weren't going to fix this because it was easier not to. As long as the consequences landed in my basement instead of their living rooms, nothing would change. So I stopped reacting and started preparing. I pulled the easement out of the file cabinet. The document yellowed at the edges, stamped 1981. Plain language, the property owner grants a perpetual drainage easement to the Ridgerest Hollow Association for stormwater conveyance. The association agrees to maintain unobstructed access and prevent blockage of the intake structure. Prevent blockage, not respond after the fact. I photographed everything, the snow being pushed over the ridge, videos of water sloshing uselessly against packed ice, the basement floor with a tape measure showing depth. I saved receipts for furnace estimates, dehumidifier rentals, ruined storage bins. I'm no litigator, never sued anyone in my life, but I ran a small construction business for 25 years. I know contracts. I know what it looks like when someone counts on you not reading the fine print. A week later, I requested a meeting with Victor and Karen at the HOA office. Beige siding, motivational landscaping, framed photos of community barbecues. Victor gestured me to a chair. Karen had a folder open, probably notes about me. Daniel, Victor began, we understand you have concerns about snow management. Concerns is one word for it, I said. Karen slid a map across the table. Topography makes downhill storage unavoidable, she said. Hauling would significantly raise association costs. So the cheaper option is to flood my house. That is not what I said, I replied. It is what is happening, she said. Victor leaned back and said, we're not responsible for acts of nature. I let that hang. Snow is nature, I said. Dumping it directly onto a drainage easement is not. Silence. I put the easement on the table and highlighted the clause. You are required to maintain unobstructed access, I said. 3 floods in 8 weeks says you are not doing that. Karen's jaw tightened. The drain itself isn't damaged, Victor said. Your furnace is... I shot back. Your property is. Your photographs are. Victor offered the polite version of, see you in court. I stood, bundled my papers. You have 6 weeks before full spring melt, I said. After that, this becomes a much bigger problem than my basement. He smiled thin. We'll take that under advisement. Walking down the hill, I realized they assumed I'd grumble, file a complaint, and absorb the loss the way the downslope guy always did. That night I called Marty Sullivan, an old friend who used to fabricate steel gates. I told him I needed a heavy-duty steel grate, reinforced lockable. You planning on keeping people out or keeping water in, he asked. Maybe both, I said. Marty quoted $800 for materials and labor. While he welded sparks lit his shop like fireflies, I drafted a precise letter, itemized damages, remediation costs, a demand for payment, and a maintenance plan, 15 years of quarterly inspections, annual fee, written snow disposal plans, and a clause, any intentional dumping onto my property would be a breach, and the drain would stay sealed until compliance was restored. It didn't feel like extortion. It felt like risk management. The grate went on a cold Tuesday. Marty and I bolted it over the intake, drilled anchors into concrete, threaded a weatherproof padlock. When it clanged shut, the sound felt good in my chest. I planted a simple sign, drain closed due to HOA easement violation. Then I sent the letter certified mail to Victor and Karen. Victor called that evening tone sharp. You can't unilaterally block critical infrastructure. You buried it, I said. This is billing for damage you ignored. There was heavy breathing, the sound of someone used to cornering people. The next day, Karen called, calmer but strategic. We're exploring legal remedies, she said. We may pursue eminent domain. I actually laughed. HOA boards aren't governments, Karen. You can't condemn my property. Please do, I said. For the first time since January, I slept through the night without checking the basement at 2 a.m. Word travels fast. Neighbors started lingering at the edge of the slope, peeking down at the locked grate. A few came up to talk, cautious, curious. The Ramirez family from 2 houses up brought coffee. We had no idea they were dumping it all down here, Mrs. Ramirez said. We thought it was just melting naturally. It's not natural when a plow blade pushes it, I told her. If that drain stays closed, are we really at risk? She asked. Yes, I replied simply. An emergency HOA meeting followed. Folding chairs, tension humming louder than the vending machine. Victor stood front and center looking tired. Karen presented cost projections for hauling snow, ugly numbers, and for potential flood damages, uglier. Someone in the back raised a hand. Why are we hearing about this now? Victor glanced at me. Daniel took unilateral action, he said. I stood. I acted after 3 floods and being ignored. The easement requires unobstructed access. It was obstructed. A murmur spread. I told them I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to make sure my house didn't pay for everyone else's convenience. That's when I saw doubt in Victor's face. The melt was coming fast. Forecasts showed a warm front rolling in. Time stopped being theoretical. You could feel the warm air before you saw it. Icicles started to drip, the snowpack darkened, sagging. By evening, water was running in thin silver lines down gutters converging toward the slope that led to me. Only this time the grate was locked. I stood at the edge of my yard with my hands in my pockets and watched a test I had warned them about begin. Water hit the culvert and spread sideways, searching for a path. Up the hill I heard a new sound. Not traffic, not wind, the sound of water moving where it wasn't supposed to. My phone buzzed. Victor, Daniel, we need to talk. I let it ring once. I'm listening, I said. Water's accumulating on Crestline Drive. Residents are worried. Good. What will it take to resolve this tonight, he asked. 2 days earlier, after a flurry of attorney emails, the HOA signed the settlement. They wired the full $18,650 to my account and signed the 15-year maintenance contract. The grate stayed locked, not as punishment, but as leverage, until they demonstrated compliance. That morning, Victor had said teams were scheduled to excavate the mound tomorrow. I said not tomorrow, tonight. I wanted the mound removed, written confirmation of a new disposal plan by midnight, and Karen here in person before I unlocked the grate. They did it in 40 minutes, actually. Floodlights at the top of the hill, rumble of machinery, the same plow company now loading snow into trucks instead of pushing it over the ridge. Karen arrived, boots splashing through water halfway down the slope, and for the first time I saw her less like a list of bullet points and more like a human. The crew dug into the mound, chunks of ice thudded into truck beds. The grate re-emerged under the lights. Karen crouched, ran a gloved hand along the concrete, said, "It's clear. We'll document this." I waited for the email, revised snow management protocol, hauling procedures, off-site storage prohibition on dumping within 50 feet of my property. Detailed, specific. I slid the key into the padlock and held it there. That small piece of brass carried weight not just for the water pooling on Crestline Drive, but for principle. I turned it. The lock clicked. The grate swung open with a solid clang. Water surged in that instant, disappearing into the dark mouth of the culvert. The shallow ponds up the slope thinned ripples, smoothing under streetlights. You could almost hear the collective exhale rolling downhill. Victor called 15 minutes later. "The streets are clearing." For the first time, his voice didn't have the practiced ease of a man used to managing impressions. "For what it's worth, we should have handled this differently." Yes, you should have. It wasn't a triumph so much as an evenness returning. Over the next week, the melt continued and the system held. Trucks hauled away the snow, crews checked the intake. Karen and I did quarterly inspections, reluctant partners, now both of us scribbling notes. The basement stayed dry. The new furnace hummed. The contract sits in my file drawer. Each fall I receive the snow management plan in my inbox. They send it. I review it with a cup of coffee at the same kitchen table where I first read the easement. Mrs. Ramirez stopped by as the last patches of snow receded. "Glad it worked out," she said. "Some still say you were too hard on the board." Maybe, I said. But soft didn't work. That's the thing about communities. Everyone wants harmony, but harmony without accountability is just quiet resentment waiting for a warm front. I didn't set out to fight the HOA. I didn't enjoy locking that grate. I'd have preferred a phone call and a quick correction in January. But every ignored warning, every polite dismissal stacked up like that snow mound until there was no room left for patience. The contract runs 15 years now. The grate stays locked unless I see compliance. Not as a threat, as leverage earned the hard way. Sometimes I stand at the edge of the yard after a storm and watch the plows work. They keep their distance. Snow goes into trucks now, not over the ridge. It's quieter. But I know something they didn't before: infrastructure is invisible until it fails, and the people at the lowest point often carry the highest risk. So tell me, was I protecting my home, or did I overstep by holding an entire hillside accountable? Should an association be responsible for maintaining the systems it depends on, even when that responsibility touches someone else's land? Or should the downslope neighbor just accept the water and keep quiet for the sake of community peace? I know where I stand. I'm curious where you do. Share a time you stood up for something small that should never have been ignored, or tell me if I went too far.